The scent of old pine and varnish has always been my sanctuary. Here, in my workshop in Savannah, I spend my days piecing together broken history, believing everything deserves a second chance to be whole. My parents call it my charming little hobby. My sister, an influencer who markets a flawless life through a phone screen, thinks it's cute that I play with splintered wood. They see dust and damage. I see stories waiting to be healed. I never imagined my own life was about to shatter into pieces that couldn't be glued back together. That painful lesson began the day I collapsed, the day the doctors called my parents, and they never came. Instead, my sister tagged me in a post that told me everything I needed to know. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Audrey, and my world has always smelled of old pine and varnish. The air in my workshop, Rosewood Restorations, is thick with the ghosts of forgotten histories, a place where I spend my days piecing together broken things, believing that everything deserves a second chance to be whole again. My hands, stained with dark walnut and calloused from years of careful sanding, find their true purpose here among the splintered legs of antique chairs and the scarred surfaces of once-loved tables. This is my sanctuary, my quiet corner of Savannah, Georgia, where I can hear the stories that wood tells. My parents refer to this passion as my charming little hobby. My older sister, Isabel, an influencer who markets a life of flawless organization to hundreds of thousands of followers, thinks it's cute that I play with what she calls other people's junk. They see dust and damage where I see character and potential. They see a business that barely breaks even, while I see a legacy inherited from my grandmother, Rose, who taught me that the most beautiful things are often imperfect. I never imagined my own life was about to shatter into pieces so sharp they couldn't simply be glued back together. That painful lesson began on a humid Tuesday afternoon. I had just landed a commission to restore a set of 18th century dining chairs for the Historical Society, a project that made my heart sing, feeling a rare spark of confidence. I decided to call one of my grandmother's oldest friends, Martha, to share the news, hoping for a sliver of the encouragement Rose always gave me. Martha was kind, but her response was laced with the familiar family narrative. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. It's so nice you have your little projects. Did you see Isabel's feature in Southern Living? Her new line of planners is just flying off the shelves. Your parents must be so proud." The familiar emptiness settled in my chest, heavier this time. It wouldn't compare. After the call, I turned my attention back to the task at hand, a heavy, ornate oak cabinet door I was trying to rehang. It was a two-person job, but my manager and best friend, Simon, was out on a supply run. I positioned myself, gripping the solid wood, my muscles straining as I lifted it toward the hinges. A sudden, sharp pain, like a bolt of lightning, shot up my spine and exploded behind my eyes. The world tilted violently, the familiar scent of sawdust replaced by a metallic taste in my mouth. The heavy door slipped from my grasp. It fell, not with a simple thud, but with a horrifying, crystalline crash as it struck a silver-gilt mirror I had just spent a week painstakingly restoring. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the sudden silence of the workshop as my knees buckled and the world went dark. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the steady, rhythmic beeping of a machine next to my bed. The warm, golden light of my workshop had been replaced by the sterile, white glare of hospital fluorescence. A kind-faced doctor explained that I had suffered a hypertensive crisis, a severe spike in blood pressure brought on by chronic stress and overwork. "It's a serious warning sign, Audrey," he said, his expression grave. Then he added, with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation, "We called your parents. They said they couldn't make it down right now. They mentioned an important family event in Atlanta." I stared at the ceiling, the white acoustic tiles swimming in and out of focus. An important family event. Isabel's launch party. The words hung in the air. Clinical and definitive. It wasn't a guess or a fear anymore. It was a fact, delivered by a stranger. Even in a medical emergency, I was not the priority. In that moment, my deep-seated desire for their approval began to curdle into something else, something cold and hard. I looked down at my hands, the calluses of familiar comfort, and a memory of Grandma Rose surfaced. She'd been showing me how to plane a piece of maple, and I'd gotten a splinter. As she removed it, she'd held my small hand in hers and said, "Hands that create, Audrey, can never be truly empty." But lying there, I felt emptier than ever. The memory deepened, pulling me back to a rainy afternoon in her workshop when I was 15. I'd been trying to fix a wobbly leg on a small writing desk. And in my frustration, I had sanded too aggressively, stripping away the delicate patina. I was convinced I had ruined it. I hid the piece under a dusty canvas, but Rose found it. She didn't scold me. She simply ran her hand over the raw, exposed wood. "A mistake isn't an ending, Audrey girl," she had said, her voice like warm honey. "It's a place where a new story begins. Now, shall we see what story this desk wants to tell?" Lying in the hospital bed, the contrast between her gentle wisdom and my family's dismissive silence was a physical pain. The next day passed in a blur of tests and quiet observation. Simon was a constant. Welcome presence. He arrived shortly after I woke up, his face etched with worry, carrying a bag with my favorite book and a change of clothes. He sat with me for hours, handling calls from concerned clients and assuring my small team that everything was under control. He was my family in that sterile room, a quiet anchor in the storm of my confusion and hurt. My phone, however, remained silent on the bedside table, a dark, unresponsive rectangle. Late that afternoon, as Simon was leaving to check on the workshop, a message finally lit up the screen. It was from my mother. My heart gave a foolish little leap of hope before I read the words. "Isabel is very worried that your little drama will overshadow her launch. Could you please post something on social media? Just to let everyone know you're fine so they stop asking questions." I read the message twice, then a third time, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. It wasn't just cold, it was a demand to perform my own wellness for the sake of my sister's brand. They didn't want me to be okay, they just wanted me to appear okay. That message was a turning point. The part of me that had spent a lifetime hoping for a crumb of their attention finally withered and died. I looked at Simon, who had seen the color drain from my face. I didn't have to show him the message. He already knew. He simply squeezed my hand, a silent promise of support. After he left, a hospital volunteer, a cheerful woman named Betty, came in to fluff my pillows. She spoke of her own son who lived across the country. "He's so busy," she said with a sigh that held no bitterness. "But my neighbors, my church group, you find family in the strangest places when you need it most." Her simple words planted a seed. The next morning, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now accompanied by a cold, clear resolve. I watched Isabel's launch party unfold on social media from my hospital bed. I saw pictures of my parents on stage, beaming with pride as they stood beside her. I saw the professionally catered food, the smiling guests, the stacks of perfectly designed planners. It was a world away from the IV drip in my arm and the lingering fear from the doctor's warnings. Instead of posting the reassuring message my mother had demanded, I took a photo of my own. It was a close-up of my hand, the pale skin bruised around the IV needle, the white hospital bracelet stark against my wrist. I didn't post it publicly. I sent it in a private message to my mother with a simple caption, "This is my little drama." Then, for the first time in my adult life, I turned my phone completely off. The silence was a relief, a small act of rebellion that felt monumental. My next call was not to my family, but to my lawyer. From my hospital bed, I instructed her to set up an irrevocable trust for Rosewood Restorations. Everything the business, the tools, the property, and most importantly, my grandmother Rose's priceless, handwritten journals of designs and techniques was to be placed within it. I named Simon as the trustee, with full control in the event I was incapacitated, and the sole heir to the legacy should anything happen to me. My family would have no claim, no access, no say. I was building a wall, not of anger, but of preservation. I was protecting my grandmother's legacy from people who had never understood its value. A few hours later, Simon returned, his expression grim. He wordlessly handed me his phone. Isabel had posted a new photo from her event, a professionally shot portrait of her and our parents, all of them glowing with success. The caption read, "So blessed to have a family that shows up and gives 100% support. Removing negativity is the key to a successful life. #support system #family goals." And then, like a final deliberate twist of the knife, she had tagged my name in the photo. I stared at it, a cold numbness spreading through me. Simon finally broke the silence, his voice low and furious. "This isn't just thoughtless. Audrey, this is cruelty disguised as branding." He was right. It was a public declaration, a carefully curated message to anyone who might have heard I was unwell. It said she is the negativity we have removed. A week later, I was back in my workshop. I was weaker, moving more slowly, but every breath of sawdust-filled air felt like a return to myself. The shattered mirror still lay in the corner, a glittering reminder of my collapse. I hadn't had the heart to clean it up yet. It felt like a part of my story now. A few days into my return, I received a call from Mr. Abernathy, the director of the Historical Society. His tone was polite but cool. "Audrey, we were so sorry to hear about your incident," he said. "Of course, your health comes first. However, the board is concerned about the timeline for the chairs. We need assurances that the project won't be delayed. I must admit, we saw your sister's posts about her own work ethic. It's a pity that level of organization doesn't run in the family." The compliment, poisoned as it was by Isabel's curated image, landed like a punch to the gut. Their narrative was now leaking into my professional life, actively undermining my credibility. The first few days were a struggle. I tried to lift a small plank of cedar, and my arms trembled, the weakness a frustrating reminder of my hospital stay. Simon gently took it from me. "Let me," he said, not with pity, but with simple, practical care. I had to learn to accept help, to lean on this chosen family that was quietly, steadfastly forming around me. That afternoon, they appeared unannounced, my parents and Isabel walking into my sanctuary as if they owned it, before Isabel could launch into her pitch. My mother tried a softer, more insidious approach. "Audrey, darling," she began, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "I was just remembering that time when you were 10, and Isabel gave you her spot at the summer art camp she had wanted so badly. All because you were feeling left out. She's always had such a big heart." It was a twisted memory, repurposed as a manipulative tool. Isabel had gotten sick and couldn't go. It had never been a sacrifice. "Audrey, you look exhausted," Isabel cut in, impatient with our mother's attempt at sentiment. "Listen, I've had a brilliant idea. One of my followers is a huge collector, and she loves the idea of family heritage. We could do a collaboration. Rosewood by Isabel. We can use some of Grandma Rose's old designs. It would be huge for you." She saw my life's work, my grandmother's soul, as a content opportunity, another accessory for her brand. I looked from her perfectly made-up face to my parents, who were nodding in enthusiastic agreement. They didn't see the insult, they only saw a connection to Isabel's success, a way for my hobby to finally become useful to them. A profound calm settled over me. All the anger, all the hurt, had distilled into a single, quiet word. "No," I said. The silence that followed was heavy. Isabel's smile faltered. "What do you mean, no?" "This is a huge opportunity. I mean, no," I repeated, my voice even. "Rosewood restorations, and everything associated with it, including Grandma Rose's journals, is now in a private trust. You have no access to it. You have no claim on it. The mask of serene wellness shattered. Isabel's face contorted with rage. You selfish, jealous brat, she shrieked. You've always been envious of me. My father stepped forward, his expression stern. Audrey, this is unacceptable. We are your family. You don't get to just cut us out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I slowly walked over to the corner of the workshop and knelt down, carefully picking up a large, sharp shard of the broken silver gilt mirror. I held it up, its fractured surface reflecting a distorted image of their angry faces. This, I said, my voice trembling slightly but clear, is what you do. You take something beautiful, something with history, and you break it because you never bothered to see what it truly was. I turned my gaze directly to Isabel. And you, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. You just stand there and tag your name on the wreckage. They left in a storm of slammed car doors and angry words. I never spoke to them again. There were calls, texts, even letters from their lawyers attempting to challenge the trust. I blocked their numbers and let my lawyer handle the rest. The silence from my end was absolute, a void where their power over me used to be. My revenge wasn't loud or fiery. It was the quiet, unassailable fact of my absence. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself leafing through one of my grandmother's journals, tucked between pages of sketches. A small folded note fell out. In her familiar, elegant script, it read, "Your hands have a memory of their own. Trust them more than you trust the voices that doubt you." It felt like a final blessing. 6 months later, I stood in a clean, white-walled gallery in New York City. The air smelled of champagne and quiet ambition. It was the opening night of my first solo exhibition. The journey here had been arduous, creating the first piece for the collection. A small table with a deep crack running through it had nearly broken me. My hands, still unsteady from my illness, refused to cooperate, frustrated and in tears. I almost gave up, but Simon had stayed with me in the workshop late into the night. "The point isn't to hide the break, Audrey," he'd said gently. "It's to honor it." His words became my mantra. I began to embrace the damage, filling the cracks in the wood with veins of gold, silver, and copper, transforming the scars into the most beautiful part of the piece. Just before the exhibition, a letter arrived at the workshop. It was from a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years. "I saw what Isabel posted," she wrote, "and I heard through the family grapevine what really happened. I'm so sorry we were all so silent. What they did was wrong. I hope you are healing." It was a small crack of light in the wall of family silence, a reminder that not everyone was complicit. My collection, titled Restorations, was a critical success. A prominent critic from an arts journal wrote a piece about my work, praising its profound meditation on finding beauty in brokenness. The article told a sanitized version of my story, focusing on my health crisis and the way my chosen family of friends and colleagues had supported my recovery. It didn't mention my parents or sister by name, but the contrast between my authentic, celebrated work and Isabel's brand of curated perfection was implicit. The story of my quiet resilience was far more compelling than her manufactured reality. During the exhibition, a woman with an impeccably tailored suit and sharp, intelligent eyes approached me. "You're Audrey," she stated more than asked. "I'm Eleanor Vance, your sister. Isabel spoke to me about a potential collaboration a few months ago. It was The Collector." My heart froze for a second. "She showed me your website," Miss Vance continued, her eyes scanning a nearby sculpture. "But what she described and what I see here are two entirely different things. She spoke of quaint, rustic charm. This has a soul. This is art. The validation, coming from the very person my sister had intended to use as a pawn, was so potent it took my breath away." As the evening wound down, another woman I didn't know approached me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I read the article about you," she said, her voice soft, "last week. My husband told me my dream of opening a small bakery was foolish, This morning, I signed a lease for a storefront. She squeezed my hand. Thank you. After she walked away, Simone appeared at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. We stood for a moment, looking at the collection glowing under the gallery lights. To Rose, he said, raising his glass. She would be so damn proud. In that moment, I understood. My story was no longer just about my pain or my family. It had become a quiet beacon for others, by healing my own broken pieces. I had shown someone else that their own dreams were worth restoring. I had lost a family, but I had found my voice, my purpose, and a profound, unshakable peace.